Abraham Hicks says, a belief is just a thought you keep on thinking. And so I want to share a little message with you today about turning stories into lessons. So as a speaker coach and as a professional speaker, this is something that I work with my clients on. And I've shared my mug story before on Instagram. And so I wanted to share it through this YouTube video that I'm making. And then it's also going to be a podcast episode, because I can't believe I haven't talked about this on a podcast episode. So a belief is just a thought that you keep on thinking. I'm going to share with you a story that I call my mug story. And you're going to get a couple of things out of this. You're going to get a lesson on how to turn your stories into lessons. So if you are someone who is a teacher, a coach, a facilitator of some sort, you're a storyteller, and you have these amazing stories that you know that you feel something, but you're not sure how to turn them into lessons so that you can actually share them with people and they can use your stories to activate something in their lives. That's what you're going to learn. And then through my mug story, the lesson is that you can change your beliefs, right? A belief is just a thought that you keep on thinking. So if it's something that you just keep on thinking, then maybe you can change your beliefs. Are you following me? Okay, so let's talk about the mug story. This is my mug story. So part of my story is sharing about where I came from. And when I was young, I'm the oldest daughter of 5 siblings. So I had one older brother, and we were poor. My family was on social assistance, and my mom was mostly a single mom. My dad wasn't around very much. And we were poor. And one of the ways that I knew that we were poor, especially when I started visiting relatives or visiting other people's houses, is that other people had nice matching dish sets. And in our home, we had like mismatched mugs, like all kinds of like coffee and tea mugs, and everything was just assorted. And so that was something that was like one of the things that really stood out to me. And so I'm a single mom of 3 sons. They're big now, but I raised them on my own. And a few years ago, while they were still growing, I mean, they were not as big as they are now. My oldest is 26 years old, so he was probably, I don't know, maybe 20, I suppose. I suppose it was 6 years ago. And I'm going through the cupboard. No, it was longer. It was longer. This was probably 8 years ago. So I'm going through the cupboard and I suddenly realize I have mismatched mugs. And I was like, this is not who I wanted to be. I really wanted to break free from that poor story narrative. And there's so many things that in my home, I wanted to make sure was different than the home that I grew up in, you know, trauma, right? So some of those things were like batteries. We never had batteries in the house. So it was always really important to me as a parent that if I bought something that required batteries, or my kids had something that required batteries, that I always had batteries in the house. You're gonna laugh at these. These are kind of strange. The batteries was one of them. Band-Aids. We never had Band-Aids. Like if you cut yourself when you were a kid, you held toilet paper on it. Scissors. We never had any scissors in the house. We didn't have knives. That's a whole other story. There was one other thing that I was going to talk about. I have a whole knife story. I'll tell that. That one's going to be in my book. I've already written it out. But there was something else. Tape. Just like Scotch tape. Like that was something that we just would never ever have in our house unless it was Christmas time and it was bought for wrapping presents, and you're not allowed to touch it because it's for wrapping presents. So anyway, I'm looking in my cupboard and I have all these mismatched mugs and I'm just like, this is not what I wanted. And immediately I got these like feelings of like, I didn't make it, I'm failing. I didn't want mismatched mugs. I wanted nice dish sets. Like, I mean, it might sound kind of silly, but to me, it was a really big thing. And so at that point I decided, okay, I had half of like 2 sets of dishes. And one of the sets that I had was given to me by a friend, and I didn't even like them. They were ugly. It was an ex-boyfriend. They were ugly dishes. And so I decided, okay, that week I'm getting rid of these ugly dishes and I'm getting a new dish set. And I had an old dish set in the basement, but it wasn't complete. So I thought, okay, I'm finally going to buy more dishes that match that one. Then I'll just have extra plates and, I'll have extra sort of thing. And so later that week, I'm really excited to make this changeover in the dishware in my cupboard. Is this a terribly boring story? As I'm telling it, I'm like, this is terrible. I'm trying to say. I go get the new dish set. I empty out my cupboard and I'm like, ready to change things over. And I start pulling out the coffee mugs from my cupboard. And I start to recognize that one is from the University of Winnipeg, one's from the University of Manitoba, one is from a local CFS agency, one is from First Nations Bank, one is it was a gift that I received from speaking. Anyway, all of these mugs, I was like, wait a second. These are not mugs that make me poor. These are mugs that are so special to me. These are mugs that mean that I have visited somewhere. I taught a session at a workplace, and as a thank you, they would give me a gift package, and one of them include their branded coffee mugs. When I spoke at universities, and they would give me their packages for thank yous with beautiful gifts, and some of them were the mugs. And that was a huge thing for me, because as a single divorced mom who was starting a speaking business and training, and I didn't have a university degree, that was something for a long time that really held me back. And I felt really insecure about it, because often I was around people who had business degrees, commerce degrees, sometimes more than one degree. And I felt so incompetent. But I had these mugs recognizing that they invited me to speak in front of audiences. And I had all of these mugs that just reminded me of so many beautiful experiences that I've had, the opportunity to share my story and who I was. And in fact, these mugs weren't something that made me poor. It was something that really, really made me rich. And my life was so enriched because of the experiences that brought these mugs into my home. I hope that helped change the story around to something exciting, because I got really emotional. And so the thing is, how I started this message is, a belief is just a thought that you keep on thinking. And you can change your beliefs. So because of my experience, because I took time to stop and reflect and really recognize and look at it from a different angle than what I was looking at, a new perspective, I started to understand that I get to choose my beliefs. Having mismatched mugs doesn't mean that I'm poor. I don't have to allow something that I thought was a belief. I don't have to make something mean something all the time. These mismatched coffee mugs don't have to mean that I'm poor. I don't have to make it mean anything, really. The other thing that I think it's really important to know is that when we have biases, and we all have our biases based on our own experiences and where we've come from, that can cause us a lot of stress. And so it's really important to stop and recognize and look at that perspective at the thing that we think is creating a belief and a standard in our lives. And you get to change your beliefs. You get to change your beliefs with perspective. A belief is just a thought that you keep on thinking. And so this new perspective that I had allowed me to have a better understanding. I had empathy for my own story. I was able to recognize how far I had come. It wasn't the mismatched mugs that was the thing ever. So that was, you know what, that's my story. That to me is a really meaningful story. And I want to give you some bullet points. I invite you to write this down. I'll put them in the notes of the video and on YouTube. But these are some things to think about when you have that story and you're like, how do I turn it into a lesson? Here are some things to ask yourself. Where did you go from? So this is something that you can look at as I went from this point to this point. So I went from thinking the mismatched mugs made me poor to actually recognizing that it had nothing to do with the mugs, but this was a representation of the experiences that I had. And the mugs were a demonstration of all of the experiences. You can also talk about it in the way that I used to think this, and now I think that. I want you to think about, in these amazing stories that you have, what is the lesson? What is the lesson that you are teaching people? How is it meaningful? And how is it meaningful to you? That's the most important thing, because when you can recognize how it's meaningful to you, then you can start looking at what is the way that this could relate to other people. One of the things that I know as a result of sharing this story is people can really relate to mismatched mugs, for one, and thinking that they're poor, and maybe their current mugs don't mean the same thing to them, but they also recognize that they don't have to make it mean anything, but they can also change their beliefs, and they really appreciate the perspective. So what actions have taken place that people can relate to in the stories that you want to share? What questions can you ask people to prompt them to be thinking of what it is that you want them to think about? And the last thing that I want to share with you is I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to tell me, how did this lesson feel for you? Did something come up for you? Did you have a bias that you recognize that you need to reassess? What questions do you have about my mug story, or about turning your stories into lessons? Or let me know if you want to talk about a belief is just a thought you keep on thinking and what that means to you. Thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to hear what you thought of this. Talk to you soon.